Hi everyone, and welcome back. If you're here, that means you're ready to dive into part 2 of this Alpha Werewolf Shifter Romance audiobook. First of all, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I'm so excited to continue sharing this story with you. Now, if you haven't seen part 1 yet, no worries. You can pause here, head down to the description, and start from the beginning. I've linked part 1 for a smooth continuation, so you won't miss a thing. Once you've caught up, you can jump right back into this video for part 2 of this Werewolf Shifter Romance audiobook. And for those of you who've already watched part 1, welcome back. This is where things get even more exciting. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's pick up right where we left off. Without further ado, let's continue the story of this Werewolf Shifter Romance audiobook. Here's Part 2. Chapter 13. The faint sound of rustling leaves drifted through Kala's open window as she stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror above her vanity. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, and her posture slouched as though the weight of her new reality had finally caught up to her. A seamstress turned magical alpha asset. It sounded ridiculous no matter how many times she rolled it over in her mind. She traced her fingers over the edge of the mirror, the cool metal grounding her as her thoughts churned. Every word Lucien had said the night before replayed in her head. "You're not a pawn. You're my partner, my equal." Partner, right. As if partnership came with no strings attached. The mirror caught the faintest flicker of movement behind her, and she turned sharply, heart hammering. The room was empty, just shadows, and the faint hum of tension that seemed to seep into every corner of this place. She exhaled slowly and rose from the vanity. "Get it together, Kala," she muttered. "Survivors don't wallow." The library was quiet when Kala slipped inside later that morning, the faint scent of aged paper and pine settling around her like a blanket. She wasn't entirely sure what she was looking for: answers, clarity, or maybe just a moment of peace. She hadn't been there long before Marceline entered, her sharp heels clicking against the marble floor like a metronome of judgment. "Well, well," Marceline said, crossing her arms as she surveyed Kala. "Hiding away again, I see." Kala bristled, refusing to rise to the bait. "If by hiding you mean trying to educate myself about the mess I've been dragged into, then sure, let's call it that." Marceline smirked, the expression as icy as ever. "You think a few hours with a book will make you fit to stand beside Lucien? To lead alongside him?" Kala closed the book in front of her with deliberate slowness, the sound echoing in the silence. "Why do you care so much, Marceline? Afraid I might actually be good at this?" The other one's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of something darker, something more vulnerable. "You don't understand what's at stake. Lucien has enemies circling him at every turn, and your presence here only makes him more vulnerable." Kala stood, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Then maybe instead of tearing me down, you could help me figure out how to make him stronger." Marceline blinked, clearly not expecting the response, but before she could answer, Kala added, "You can hate me all you want, but I'm not leaving, so you have two choices: fight me or help me. Your call." For a long moment, Marceline said nothing. Then, with a slight incline of her head, she turned and left, her silence louder than any words she could have spoken. The encounter left Kala shaken, but oddly resolute. It was the first time she'd stood her ground here, and though her legs still trembled, she felt a spark of pride. She spent the rest of the day avoiding people, the conversation with Marceline replaying in her mind. By the time dinner rolled around, she was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. Lucien found her in the garden, her knees drawn to her chest as she sat on a stone bench under the stars. "You're quiet tonight," he said, his voice soft as he approached. "Just thinking," she replied, not looking at him. He sat beside her, the warmth of his presence a stark contrast to the cool night air. "About what?" She hesitated, unsure if she wanted to share the tangled mess of emotions swirling inside her, but something about the way he looked at her, open, unguarded, made her speak. About all of this, she said finally, gesturing vaguely to the estate, the pack, the world she'd been thrust into. About what it means to stay, and what it'll cost. Lucien's expression softened, a hint of sorrow flickering in his eyes. I wish I could tell you it won't be hard, that you won't lose pieces of yourself along the way, but I can't. His honesty caught her off guard and she turned to face him fully. Then why do it? Why take on all of this, the pack, the enemies, the weight of it all? He looked away, his gaze distant. Because it's not just about me, it's about them, about keeping them safe, giving them a future. That's what an alpha does. And what about you? She pressed. What about what you want? Lucien's lips twitched into a faint, humorless smile. What I want stopped mattering a long time ago. The vulnerability in his voice tugged at something deep inside her, and for the first time she saw not just the powerful alpha, but the man beneath. You're allowed to want things, Lucien, she said softly, even if it's just not to be alone in all of this. His gaze snapped back to hers, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Calla, the moment stretched between them, charged and unspoken. But before either of them could break it, the distant howl of a wolf shattered the silence, pulling them both back to reality. Lucien rose, his expression hardening once more. We should head inside. Calla nodded, but as she followed him back to the estate, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. Calla leaned against the smooth wooden frame of the mirror in her room, her reflection staring back with a mix of defiance and exhaustion. The past few weeks had reshaped her life into something unrecognizable, like clay molded by forces outside her control. But now, she wasn't sure she even recognized herself. Her dark hair hung in loose waves over her shoulders, and her eyes, always softer in the past, now carried a sharpness she couldn't ignore. She traced the edge of the mirror's ornate frame with her fingers, her thoughts heavy with everything she'd learned, and the weight of what was yet to come. No more playing the victim, she whispered to herself. No more letting them push me around. Her vow was tested almost immediately when she went downstairs to grab a late dinner. The kitchen was quiet, save for the hum of the fridge, and she'd just managed to fix herself a sandwich when Marceline appeared in the doorway, her presence as cold and sharp as ever. Whoa, Marceline said, her voice dripping with mockery. Playing house already? Calla rolled her eyes and bit into her sandwich. Do you ever take a break from being insufferable? Marceline sauntered into the kitchen, her predatory grace making her seem taller than she was. I just find it fascinating that you're still here. You'd think after last night's attack you'd realize you're out of your depth. Last night's attack isn't going to scare me off, Calla said, setting her plate down and meeting Marceline's icy gaze. Marceline's lips curled into a smirk. That's cute, but bravery doesn't make up for incompetence. Calla clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm. If you're so worried about my incompetence, why don't you try helping instead of acting like a jealous ex? Marceline's smirk vanished, replaced by a glint of fury. Watch your mouth, human. You don't understand how fragile your position here really is. Calla squared her shoulders, stepping closer. And you don't understand that I'm done letting you or anyone else talk down to me. I'm not going anywhere, Marceline, whether you like it or not. Marceline's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. We'll see. With that, she turned and left, her heels clicking against the floor like punctuation marks to her threat. Calla exhaled slowly, her pulse racing. Standing up to Marceline felt good, empowering even. But it also left her wondering what kind of retaliation might follow. Later that evening, Lucien found her in the library, curled up with one of the old books she'd found in the estate's hidden room. She looked up as he entered, his broad frame filling the doorway. You're reading that? He asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. Calla closed the book, careful not to lose her place. I figured it's time I start educating myself about this world of yours. Lucien's lips twitched into the faintest smile as he crossed the room to sit beside her. What do you think so far? It's overwhelming, she admitted, setting the book on the table between them. But also fascinating. Your world has so many rules, so much history. It's like a whole different universe. It's like a whole different universe. It is, he said, his voice softer now, and it's not always easy to navigate. She studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw and the faint shadows under his eyes. How do you do it? She asked. Carry all of this on your shoulders? Lucien hesitated, his gaze fixed on the flickering fire across the room. I don't always know, he admitted. There are days when the weight feels unbearable, but I don't have a choice. The pack depends on me. His vulnerability caught her off guard, and for a moment she saw him not as the commanding alpha, but as a man trying to keep his world from falling apart. You don't have to do it alone, you know, she said softly. Lucien turned to her, his blue eyes searching hers. That's the thing, Calla. I don't trust easily, but with you, it's different. Her breath hitched at the intensity in his gaze, and for a moment, the tension between them felt like a live wire, sparking with something unspoken. I don't know if I can live up to what you need, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You already are, he replied. The weight of his words settled over her, equal parts comforting and terrifying. After Lucien left, Calla found herself staring into the mirror again, her mind racing. She thought of Marceline's accusations, Lucien's burdens, and the strength she'd discovered in herself over the past few weeks. The person staring back at her wasn't the quiet seamstress from the lower dict anymore. This Calla was something else entirely. Someone who refused to be a pawn in anyone's game. Fine, she said to her reflection, her voice steady. If they think I'm a liability, I'll prove them wrong. On my terms. The resolve in her voice surprised even her. But as she turned away from the mirror, a spark of determination ignited in her chest. Calla stood at the threshold of the hidden room again, her mind made up. If she was going to survive in Lucien's world, she needed answers. And she'd find them, no matter what secrets the pack was hiding. Chapter 14. The hidden room had become Calla's refuge. With the estate's constant hum of activity and the looming tension among the pack, it was the only place where she could think clearly and plan. Stacks of documents lay sprawled across the table before her, their faded ink detailing centuries of pack lore, alliances, and rivalries. Among them were scraps of more recent notes, likely gathered by Lucien and Rowan, chronicling the splinter group's activities. The fragments painted a grim picture. Discontent over Lucien's leadership, whispers of Jarek's promises to the defectors, and scattered mentions of something called the Nightfall Accord. What are you hiding? Calla muttered under her breath, scanning another sheet. It was slow work, deciphering the archaic language and piecing together half-truths. But her solitude didn't last. Mind telling me what you're doing? Rowan's voice startled her, and she spun around to find him leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. I could ask you the same thing, she said, trying to mask her surprise. This room is off-limits, he said, his tone cool but edged with curiosity. Then why didn't you lock it? She shot back, raising an eyebrow. Rowan smirked faintly, but his expression remained guarded. Lucien won't like this. Lucien doesn't have to know, she said, her tone firm. And before you start lecturing me about stepping out of bounds, maybe you should consider that I'm trying to help. Rowan's gaze flicked to the table, his sharp eyes scanning the documents. Help how? By reading old treaties and forgotten laws? By figuring out why this splinter group hates Lucien so much, she replied. If I can understand their motives, maybe I can find a way to stop them. You think they'll just give up because you cracked their code? He asked, skepticism heavy in his voice. No, Calla admitted. But knowledge is power, and right now the pack needs all the power it can get. Rowan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. You've got guts, I'll give you that." "Was that a compliment?" she asked, tilting her head. "Don't get used to it," he said, though the corner of his mouth twitched into the faintest smile. It didn't take much convincing to get Rowan to agree to train her. He was reluctant at first, his protective instincts clashing with his grudging respect for her determination. But when Calla pointed out that she was more of a liability untrained, he finally relented. The next morning, they met in the clearing behind the estate. Rowan had swapped his usual crisp attire for a more casual look. Dark pants and a sleeveless shirt that showed off the scars crisscrossing his arms. "All right," he said, tossing her a wooden practice staff. "First rule of combat, don't let your opponent get inside your head." Calla caught the staff awkwardly, nearly dropping it. "Sounds easy enough." "It's not," Rowan said, circling her like a predator sizing up its prey. "Especially when your opponent knows your weaknesses." "What if I don't have any weaknesses?" she shot back, trying to sound confident. Rowan smirked. "Everyone has weaknesses, Calla. The trick is not letting them show." Their sparring session was brutal. Rowan didn't hold back, and Calla quickly realized just how outmatched she was, but she refused to give up, even as her arms ached and her legs trembled from the effort. "Again," Rowan said, after she'd landed flat on her back for the third time. "You know," she panted, "most trainers would start with the basics." "This is the basics," he replied, offering her a hand. Calla glared at him but accepted the help, pulling herself to her feet. "Remind me why I asked for this again." "Because you don't want to be a liability," he said simply. The word stung, but it also fueled her determination. By the end of the session, Calla was covered in bruises and drenched in sweat, but she felt accomplished. She'd landed a few solid hits on Rowan, and while he'd clearly been holding back, it was a start. "You did better than I expected," he said as they walked back to the estate. "Again with the backhanded compliments," she muttered, but she couldn't keep the small smile off her face. "You'll thank me when you're not dead," Rowan said dryly. "Charming," she replied, though she couldn't deny the truth in his words. Later that day, Calla found herself in the kitchen, nursing a mug of tea and reflecting on the progress she'd made. The pack members who passed by gave her a mix of wary glances and curious looks. And while it was clear she still had a long way to go to earn their trust, the ice was starting to thaw. A young woman named Lila, one of the newer pack members, even stopped to chat with her for a few minutes, sharing stories about life before she'd joined the pack. "You're tougher than you look," Lila said with a grin. "Thanks," Calla said, her cheeks warming. It wasn't much, but it felt like a step in the right direction. When Lucien caught wind of her training sessions with Rowan, he was less than thrilled. "You're putting yourself at risk," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "And you're not?" Calla shot back, meeting his glare with one of her own. "If you can fight for the pack, why can't I?" "Because it's different," he said, his tone softening. "You don't know what you're getting into, Calla. This world, it's brutal, unforgiving. And teach me," she said, her voice firm, "because I'm not going to sit on the sidelines while you and the rest of the pack fight my battles for me." Lucien stared at her, his jaw tight and his eyes stormy. For a moment she thought he might argue, but then he sighed, the fight draining from his posture. "You're impossible," he muttered, though there was a hint of admiration in his tone. "You're welcome," she replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. As Calla practiced with Rowan later that evening, a shadow emerged from the trees at the edge of the clearing. It was Lila, her usually warm expression replaced with a grave intensity. "I need to talk to you," Lila said, her voice trembling. Rowan stepped forward, his stance protective, but Lila held up a hand. "It's about the splinter group," she said, her gaze flicking to Calla. "And their leader. There's something you need to know." Calla's stomach twisted as Lila's words hung in the air, heavy with implications she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The clearing fell silent as Lila stepped closer, her trembling voice carrying a weight that made Calla's stomach churn. Rowan narrowed his eyes. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to," Lila said, her gaze darting nervously between Rowan and Calla. "If they find out I've been talking to you—" "They who?" Calla asked, gripping the practice staff in her hand like it could shield her from whatever was coming next. Lila hesitated, glancing toward the shadows of the forest as if expecting someone, or something, to emerge. "The Splinter Group. I've been keeping tabs on them." Rowan took a step forward, his expression darkening. "You've been spying for them?" "No!" Lila snapped, her fear suddenly edged with frustration. "I've been spying on them for weeks now." She turned to Calla, her eyes pleading. "You need to know the truth about their leader, about Jarek." Calla's heart raced. "What about him?" "He's not the one calling the shots," Lila said. "The real leader? It's Tasha." Calla blinked, the name sparking recognition. Tasha was the young woman from the photo she'd seen in the hidden room, the one Rowan had called a defector. "She's part of the Splinter Group?" Calla asked, her mind racing. "She's leading it," Lila said. "Jarek might be their enforcer, but Tasha is the one pulling the strings, and she's fixated on you." Calla's blood turned cold. "Why me?" Rowan crossed his arms, his jaw clenched. "Tasha's always had a grudge against Lucien. If she sees you as his weak spot, she'll explode it," Calla finished, the realization making her skin crawl. "It's more than that," Lila said, her voice dropping. "She knows about your bloodline, Calla, and she thinks you're the key to overthrowing Lucien." Calla staggered back a step, her grip tightening on the staff. "I didn't ask for any of that." "No one ever does," Rowan said grimly. Lila's confession set a new fire in Calla's chest. If Tasha thought she was a pawn to be used in some twisted power game, she was sorely mistaken. Rowan must have sensed her resolve because he stepped in front of her, his expression hard. "Whatever you're thinking, don't. This isn't your fight." "It is now," Calla shot back, meeting his glare. "If Tasha wants to make me her target, then I'm not going to sit around and wait for her to strike." "You don't understand what she's capable of," Rowan said, his voice low and dangerous. "Then teach me," Calla said, her tone unwavering. "Show me how to fight back." Rowan stared at her for a long moment before finally nodding. "Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." The training sessions intensified after that. Rowan pushed Calla harder than before, his usual dry remarks giving way to stern commands and relentless drills. "You're hesitating," he barked, as Calla swung her staff and missed her target. "I'm not hesitating," she snapped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Then hit harder," he said, stepping closer. "You think Tasha's going to hold back because you're tired? Because you're scared?" Calla gritted her teeth and swung again, this time connecting with the wooden dummy's head. The impact reverberated up her arms, but the satisfaction of the hit made the ache worth it. "Better," Rowan said, nodding. She wiped sweat from her brow and glared at him. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" He smirked. "Maybe a little." By the end of the week, Calla had made noticeable progress. Her movements were more fluid, her strikes more precise, and the bruises on her arms and legs had become badges of honor. The pack noticed, too. Calla caught a few of them watching her during training sessions, their once skeptical gazes softening into something respectful. Even Marceline, though still frosty, had stopped making snide comments. At least for now. Lucien, however, remained conflicted. One evening, after a particularly grueling session with Rowan, Calla found Lucien waiting for her in the library. He stood by the window, the moonlight casting sharp angles across his face. "You've been pushing yourself," he said without turning around. Calla dropped into a chair, her limbs aching. "And you're welcome." His lips twitched into a faint smile, but the tension in his posture didn't ease. "You don't have to do this, Calla." "Yes, I do," she said, her voice firm. "If Tasha's coming for me, I'm not going to sit around and hope for the best. I'm going to be ready." Lucien turned to face her, his blue eyes stormy. "It's not just about Tasha. This life, it changes you. Once you cross that line, there's no going back." "Maybe I don't want to go back," she said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Lucien stepped closer, his gaze softening. I just don't want you to lose yourself in all of this. Calla met his eyes, her chest tightening. I won't. But I can't stand by and do nothing, Lucien. I'm part of this now, whether either of us likes it or not. His jaw tightened, but he nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Then we do this together. As Lucien and Calla stood in quiet agreement, the distant howl of a wolf shattered the silence. Rowan appeared in the doorway moments later, his expression grim. We have a problem, he said. Tasha's making her move. Calla's pulse quickened as Lucien's gaze darkened. The battle she'd been preparing for was closer than she thought. Chapter 15. The moon hung low over the sprawling wolf estate as Calla adjusted the neckline of her borrowed dress for what felt like the 100th time. The floor-length midnight blue gown was a masterpiece of understated elegance, the soft fabric clinging in all the right places while allowing her the freedom to move. It wasn't her usual style. She felt more comfortable in jeans and sneakers. But tonight, she had a role to play. Lucien had made that very clear. This isn't just a party, he'd said earlier, his tone low and serious. It's a power play. Yeah, I figured that out from the wardrobe upgrade, she'd replied, earning a rare smirk from him. Now, as she stood in front of her mirror, she couldn't help but wonder what she'd gotten herself into. The event was being held in the grand ballroom, a space that looked like it had been ripped straight out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the polished marble floors, and the room was filled with impeccably dressed guests, alphas and their entourages, all gathered under one roof. Calla clung to Lucien's arm as they entered, her nerves buzzing. His presence was a shield, and she was acutely aware of the way every eye in the room turned toward them. Relaxe, Lucien murmured, leaning close enough that his breath brushed her ear. You've got this. Easy for you to say, she muttered back. You're not the one being stared at like a zoo exhibit. Lucien chuckled softly, the sound low and reassuring. They're just curious. You're the talk of the pack leaders. Great, she said dryly. My worst nightmare. They hadn't been in the room for more than 5 minutes before trouble found them. Lucien, a familiar voice drawled. Finally decided to make an appearance? Calla tensed as Jarek approached, his golden eyes gleaming with amusement. He was dressed impeccably in a black suit, but there was something predatory in his movements that made her skin crawl. Jarek, Lucien said coolly, his grip on Calla's arm tightening slightly. Enjoying yourself? Immensely, Jarek said, his gaze flicking to Calla. And I see you brought your mate. The word was laced with mockery, and Calla forced herself to hold her ground. Calla, she said, meeting his gaze head-on, it's nice to see you again. Jarek's smirk widened. You've got spirit. I'll give you that. Shmi's got more than spirit, Lucien said, his voice carrying a quiet warning. She's got me. The tension between the two men was palpable, and Calla resisted the urge to step back. Instead, she straightened her spine and forced a polite smile. If you'll excuse us, Lucien said, steering Calla away. As the evening wore on, Calla found herself introduced to more alphas than she could keep track of, each one sizing her up with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. She's not what I expected, one said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. She's stronger than she looks, another remarked, nodding approvingly. The constant scrutiny was exhausting, but Calla managed to keep her composure, even as the veiled insults and subtle barbs piled up. It wasn't until she stepped away from the crowd to catch her breath that she encountered someone who made her blood run cold. Near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows, a woman stood sipping a glass of red wine. She was striking, with dark hair that tumbled over her shoulders in loose waves, and eyes that gleamed with intelligence. Tasha, Calla murmured under her breath. recognizing her from the photograph she'd seen in the hidden room. The woman turned, her lips curling into a smile. "You must be Calla," she said, her voice warm but laced with something Calla couldn't quite place. "And you are?" Calla asked, feigning ignorance. "Tasha," she said smoothly. "Lucien's been speaking highly of you." Calla raised an eyebrow. "Has he now?" Tasha took a sip of her wine, her gaze never leaving Calla's. "You're an interesting choice for a mate. Unexpected, but intriguing." The compliment felt like a trap, and Calla forced herself to smile. "Thanks, I think. I'll be watching your progress," Tasha said, her tone light but her words heavy with meaning. "The pack's future depends on it." Calla returned to Lucien's side with her heart racing. Tasha's presence at the event confirmed her suspicions. She was more deeply embedded in the pack than anyone realized, but as she glanced around the room, Calla couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something. The splinter group's betrayal ran deep, and she needed to figure out just how far their influence spread. As the night wound down, Calla overheard a hushed conversation between two pack members in a secluded corner of the ballroom. "I told you, we can't risk exposing ourselves," one said, his voice tense. "Lucien's distracted," the other replied. "This is the perfect time to move." Calla's blood ran cold as the implications sank in. Someone close to Lucien was working against him, and she was determined to find out who. The voices drifted from the shadowed alcove near the ballroom's edge, low and sharp like the scrape of steel against stone. Calla edged closer, her pulse pounding in her ears. She flattened herself against the wall, hidden behind a massive marble pillar, and strained to hear more. "We can't wait much longer," the first voice said, hushed but forceful. "If we miss this window, he'll tighten his hold." "And what about the girl?" the second voice countered. "She's part of his leverage now." Calla's stomach twisted. They were talking about her. "She's a liability," the first voice spat. "But if we can use her—" The rest of the sentence was drowned out by a sudden burst of laughter from the main crowd. Calla leaned forward, her breath catching as her shoes scuffed the marble floor. The two figures turned toward the sound, their faces briefly illuminated by the flickering light of a nearby candelabra. Calla recognized one immediately, a mid-rank member named Derek, someone she'd seen trailing Rowan during training sessions. The other was a woman she didn't recognize, her angular face shadowed but unmistakably wary. Calla ducked back behind the pillar, her mind racing. Derek? He wasn't just some foot soldier. He was embedded deep in Lucien's inner circle. Before she could decide what to do next, a familiar voice startled her. "Calla?" She whipped around to see Lucien standing behind her, his brow furrowed in concern. "What are you doing back here?" She stammered, but before she could explain, the two figures in the alcove disappeared into the crowd. Calla cursed silently. Lucien stepped closer, his eyes scanning her face. "What's going on?" She hesitated, debating whether to tell him what she'd overheard. But the memory of Derek's words, "If we can use her," hardened her resolve. "Not here," she said, her voice firm. "Somewhere private." Back in the study, Calla paced while Lucien leaned against his desk, his arms crossed and his expression dark. She recounted what she'd heard, leaving out nothing. Derek, Lucien said, his tone as sharp as a blade. "I trusted him." That's the point," Calla said, stopping mid-step. "The splinter group isn't just targeting you. They're using people you trust to tear the pack apart. From the inside." Lucien's jaw tightened, the muscle in his cheek twitching. "This goes deeper than I thought." "And Tasha," Calla added, her voice dropping. "She was at the event tonight. She spoke to me. She knew exactly who I was." Lucien straightened, his blue eyes flashing with anger. "She's making her move." "She's not the only one," Calla said. "Lucien, we need to act now or they're going to dismantle everything you've built." His gaze softened as it met hers. "We?" "Yes, we," she said firmly. I'm not just going to stand on the sidelines and let this happen. Kala, no, she interrupted, stepping closer. I've been through hell these past few weeks. I've been insulted, threatened, attacked, and I'm still standing. I'm not doing this for you or for your pack, I'm doing this for me. Lucien's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile, though his eyes remained stormy. You're impossible. You're welcome, she quipped, crossing her arms. The following morning, Kala found herself back in the training grounds with Rowan, her body still sore from their last session. This time, though, she had a clear purpose. What's this about? Rowan asked, his tone more curious than annoyed as he watched her retrieve a staff from the rack. It's about being ready, Kala said, gripping the staff tightly. Last night proved that I can't afford to let my guard down. Not with everything that's happening. Rowan arched an eyebrow, but didn't argue. All right then, let's see what you've got. The session was grueling, and Rowan wasn't pulling his punches. He forced Kala to think on her feet, to anticipate his movements and react faster than she thought possible. Again, he barked as she blocked one of his strikes, only to falter on the follow-up. I'm trying, she panted, sweat dripping down her temple. Try harder, he said, his voice sharp but not unkind. By the time they finished, Kala was exhausted but exhilarated. She'd landed more hits than she'd missed, and the look of begrudging approval on Rowan's face felt like a victory in itself. You're improving, he said as they walked back to the estate. Whoa, was that a compliment? She asked, smirking. Don't get used to it, he replied, though his tone was lighter than usual. Kala's next move was to start building alliances within the pack. She knew she couldn't take on the splinter group alone, and gaining the trust of Lucien's loyalists was crucial. It started with small gestures, helping Lila with her chores, sparring with some of the younger members, and making an effort to be present during pack gatherings. Slowly but surely, the pack began to warm to her. She's tougher than she looks, one member said after watching her spar with Rowan. He's cut guts, another added. Even Marceline, while still icy, seemed less openly hostile. You're making progress, Lucien said one evening as they sat together in the library. Don't sound so surprised, Kala replied, shooting him a wry smile. It's not surprise, he said, his voice quieter now. It's pride. The admission caught her off guard, and she found herself looking away, her cheeks flushing. Well, don't get too proud yet. We've still got work to do. As the evening wound down, Kala retreated to her room, only to find a folded note slipped under her door. Be careful who you trust. Her blood ran cold as she read the words. No signature, no explanation, just a warning that left her more uncertain than ever. Who had sent it, and more importantly, how much did they know? Chapter 16. The night was supposed to be quiet. Kala leaned against the balcony railing outside her room, letting the cool breeze tousle her hair. Below, the estate grounds were serene, the forest dark and still. For a moment it felt as though the tension of the last few days had lifted, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the faint glow of moonlight. Her fingers tightened around the folded note in her pocket. Be careful who you trust. She didn't know who had left it or why, but the warning had wrapped around her thoughts like a vine, refusing to loosen its grip. A howl shattered the stillness. It wasn't the usual sound of a wolf on patrol. This was sharper, more urgent. A warning. Kala straightened, her heart pounding. From the forest, shadows emerged. Dozens of them, moving quickly, silently. The air shifted, electric with danger. A knock on her door startled her, and she turned to find Rowan already stepping inside, his expression grim. They're here, he said. The attack came fast, a coordinated strike that sent the estate into chaos. Kala followed Rowan down the stairs, the sounds of snarls and shouts echoing through the grand hall. Lucien's pack members were already moving, their sleek wolf forms darting toward the intruders with deadly precision. What do I do? Kala asked, her voice sharp with adrenaline. Rowan handed her a short silver blade, its edge gleaming even in the dim light. Stay alive And if one of them gets close, don't hesitate. Calla nodded, gripping the blade tightly. The first wave hit the outer grounds, the splinter group's rogues clashing with Lucien's defenders. Calla stayed close to the mansion, her eyes scanning the shadows for movement. A snarl erupted behind her, and she spun just in time to see a rogue wolf lunging toward her. Without thinking, she ducked and thrust the blade upward, catching the wolf in its side. It yelped and stumbled back, its eyes glowing with fury before retreating into the night. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but there was no time to recover. Another rogue appeared, this one in human form, a feral grin on his face. "Well, look who's playing hero," he sneered. Calla tightened her grip on the blade. "Want to see how good I am at it?" The rogue lunged, but Calla was ready. She sidestepped his attack and swung the blade in a wide arc, forcing him to dodge. They circled each other, his movements quick but undisciplined, her training with Rowan giving her the edge she needed. With a sharp feint and a well-timed strike, she sent him sprawling to the ground. The chaos intensified as the splinter group pushed closer to the mansion. Calla found herself in the thick of it, dodging claws and teeth, her blade a lifeline. Rowan appeared at her side, his wolf form sleek and deadly as he took down a rogue attempting to flank her. He shifted back to human briefly, blood streaking his face. "You're holding up," he said, his tone almost approving. "Don't sound so surprised," she shot back, scanning the battlefield. "I'm not," he replied, before shifting again and disappearing into the fray. Inside the mansion, Lucien was a force of nature. Calla caught a glimpse of him in the main hall, his body half-shifted as he fought off 3 rogues at once. His claws slashed through the air with deadly precision, and his glowing eyes radiated raw power. But there was something else, something primal and terrifying in the way he moved, like a storm unleashed. "Lucien!" she called, but he didn't seem to hear her. He took down the last rogue with a growl that sent shivers down her spine, his chest heaving as he turned to face her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough, his wolf side still bleeding into his words. "I'm fine," she said, her pulse racing, "but they're everywhere." "I know," he said, his jaw tightening. "Stay close to me." The tide of the battle shifted as more of Lucien's pack joined the fight, their coordinated efforts driving the rogues back toward the forest. But Calla's relief was short-lived. From the shadows of the tree line, a new figure emerged. The leader. She couldn't see their face clearly, but their presence was undeniable. A calm, commanding energy that made the other rogues seem like amateurs. Calla squinted, trying to get a better look, but the figure melted into the forest before she could catch more than a fleeting impression. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun, the rogues retreating into the woods under the leader's direction. The estate was left battered but standing, its defenders bloodied but victorious. Calla sat on the steps of the mansion, her body aching, her mind racing. She'd held her own, she'd fought, and she'd survived, but the glimpse of the leader's figure haunted her, the question of their identity gnawing at her like a thorn. Lucien found her there, his expression a mix of pride and worry. He sat beside her, his arm brushing hers. "You did well tonight," he said, his voice low. "Thanks," she said, exhaling slowly. "But it's not over, is it?" "No," he admitted, his gaze distant. "This was just the beginning." Calla turned to him, her resolve hardening. "Then we fight back, together." Lucien looked at her, his blue eyes softening. "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." "And you're more stubborn than I thought," she said with a small smile. His lips twitched into a faint smirk. "We make a good team." The quiet moment between them was interrupted by Rowan, his expression grim as he approached. "We need to talk," he said. "What is it?" Lucien asked, standing. Rowan hesitated, his gaze flicking to Calla. "The leader. I think I know who it is." Calla's breath caught as Rowan's words hung in the air. They had a name, and that name could change everything. Chapter 17. The air in the estate felt heavier than usual, like the walls themselves were bracing for another blow. Calla noticed it the moment she stepped into the main hall. Conversations were quieter, laughter non-existent. Even the pack members who usually greeted her with wary but polite nods avoided her gaze. Something had shifted. She found Lucien in the war room, his broad frame hunched over a table covered in maps and documents. Rowan stood beside him, his arms crossed and his face grim. "What's going on?" Calla asked, her voice breaking the tense silence. Lucien didn't look up. Rowan glanced at her, his jaw tightening. "We've confirmed what you overheard. The splinter groups infiltrated the pack." Lucien straightened, finally meeting her gaze. "Derek was working for Tasha? He's been feeding her information for months." Calla took a step back, the weight of the revelation crashing down on her. "I knew something was off about him," she said, her voice shaking. "I should have said something sooner." "This isn't your fault," Lucien said, his tone sharper than he intended. "Isn't it?" Calla shot back, anger bubbling to the surface. "I overheard him, Lucien. I could have warned you. Maybe we could have stopped this before it got worse." Rowan stepped in, his voice firm but calm. "Calla, you couldn't have known the extent of his betrayal. None of us did." But the guilt wouldn't let her go. The fallout was immediate. Derek's betrayal sent ripples of paranoia through the pack, every interaction tinged with suspicion. "Trust is earned, not given," Marceline said as she leaned against the kitchen counter later that day, her tone as icy as ever. "And you haven't exactly earned much." Calla, standing across from her, bristled. "This isn't about me, isn't it?" Marceline countered, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Derek might have been the traitor, but you're the one who brought him to Lucien's attention in the first place. How do we know you are not playing the same game?" "Enough, Marceline," Rowan said, entering the room and cutting through the tension. Calla turned to him, hoping for backup, but his expression was unreadable. Marceline smirked. "Just food for thought," she said, before sauntering out. Calla let out a shaky breath, her fists clenched at her sides. "She's impossible. She's not wrong to be cautious," Rowan said, his voice low. Calla's gaze snapped to him, her frustration mounting. "You think I'd betray you?" "No," he said after a pause. "But this pack is on edge and everything's under scrutiny right now, including you." Lucien grew increasingly distant in the days that followed, his attention consumed by damage control. Calla found him late one night in the study, poring over another stack of documents. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and the dark circles under his eyes spoke volumes about how little he'd slept. "Lucien," she said softly, stepping inside. He didn't look up. "It's late. You should be resting." "So should you," she countered, crossing the room to stand beside him. "You can't keep carrying all of this on your own." "I don't have a choice," he said, his voice flat. "You do," she insisted, her hand brushing his arm. "Let me help." He finally looked at her, his blue eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Calla, you've done enough. I can't afford to divide my focus right now." The words hit harder than she expected. "To divide your focus?" she repeated, her voice cracking. "Is that what I am? A distraction?" Lucien sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "Calla," he said, his tone soft but firm. "I need to protect this pack. Everything else has to come second." Her chest tightened, his words cutting deeper than she cared to admit. "Including me." Lucien didn't answer, and the silence was louder than any argument. She turned and left, her heart heavier with every step. The tension between them didn't go unnoticed. Marceline, ever the opportunist, seized the chance to stoke the flames. "If you can't handle being sidelined, maybe you're not cut out for this world," she said one morning, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. Calla, tired and raw, glared at her. "Do you ever take a day off from being a pain?" Marceline's smile was razor sharp. "I'm just trying to help you see the reality of your situation. This isn't a fairy tale, Calla. You're either useful to the pack or you're expendable." "Marceline," Rowan warned, but she ignored him. "I don't need your advice," Calla snapped, "or your approval. Good, Marceline said with a smirk. Because you'll never have it. Calla threw herself into training, desperate to channel her frustration into something productive. She spent hours sparring with Rowan, her movements fueled by anger and determination. "You're pushing too hard," Rowan said after she stumbled for the third time that afternoon. "I'm fine," she insisted, wiping sweat from her brow. "You're not," he said, his tone firm. "This isn't just about training anymore. What's going on?" Calla hesitated, the weight of her emotions threatening to spill over. I feel like I'm failing. Everyone. Lucian, the pack, myself." Rowan studied her for a moment before nodding. "Then stop trying to carry it all alone. That's Lucian's mistake. Don't make it yours." The words struck a chord, but they didn't ease the ache in her chest. That night, unable to sleep, Calla found herself back in the hidden room. She sifted through the documents and artifacts, searching for something, anything, that could give her an edge. One document caught her eye, its faded ink and ornate script marking it as older than the others. She carefully unfolded it, her breath catching as she read the words, "The Argul lineage, guardians of the Accord." Her heart pounded as she scanned the text, piecing together fragments of a history she'd never known. Her family hadn't just been part of the pack, they'd been integral to its foundation, their bloodline tied to the mystical laws that governed the werewolves. But there was more. A passage at the bottom of the document sent a chill down her spine. "Beware those who seek to break the accord, for their power lies in what has been lost." Calla's mind raced, the pieces falling into place. The splinter group wasn't just after Lucian's power, they were after her family's legacy. Calla clutched the document tightly, the implications sinking in. Her connection to the pack ran deeper than she'd ever imagined, and the splinter group's betrayal wasn't just an attack on Lucian. It was an attack on her. And if they succeeded, everything could fall apart. Chapter 18. Calla's pulse raced as she stared at the document in front of her. The ink was faded, the edges of the parchment brittle, but the words burned bright in her mind. The Arbor lineage, guardians of the Accord. Her hands trembled as she traced the name at the bottom, her family's name. "Guardians of the Accord?" she whispered, the title foreign and yet oddly familiar. Her parents had never spoken of anything like this, their history shrouded in vague explanations and unanswered questions. She leaned closer, scanning the text. The Accord was a centuries-old agreement between rival packs, meant to prevent all-out war. The Arbor bloodline, it seemed, had been entrusted with safeguarding its mystical underpinnings. Something about balance, strength, and power. The more she read, the clearer it became. Her bloodline wasn't just part of the pack's history. It was at the... She was still poring over the records when the door to the hidden room swung open. Lucian strode in, his expression sharp as his eyes zeroed in on her. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Calla held up the parchment, her voice tight. "Looking for answers, and I found them." Lucian crossed the room in 3 long strides, snatching the document from her hand. His eyes scanned the text, his jaw tightening with every word. "This doesn't make sense," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "It does if you think about why Tasha's after me," Calla said, rising to her feet. "My family wasn't just part of the pack, they were its foundation. And now Tasha thinks she can use me to destroy you?" Lucian's head snapped up, his gaze blazing. "Why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" "Tell you what?" Calla shot back, her frustration bubbling over. "That my parents never talked about their past? That I didn't know any of this until 5 minutes ago?" Lucien's fists clenched, his knuckles white. "Do you realize what this means? If the splinter group has access to this information..." "Then they already do," Calla interrupted, her voice cutting through his. "Tasha knows more about my family than I do, and that's why I'm a target." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging between them. Lucian turned away, pacing the length of the room. Kala could see the tension radiating from him, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down like an iron cage. "You should have come to me," he said finally, his voice tight. Kala's frustration boiled over. "Come to you? Are you serious? You've been shutting me out for days, Lucian. Every time I try to help, you act like I'm just in the way." "That's not what Isn't it?" she demanded, cutting him off. "Because that's exactly how it feels." Lucian stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping. For a moment, he looked less like the invincible alpha and more like a man on the verge of breaking. "I'm trying to protect you, Kala," he said, his voice quieter now. "That's all I've ever wanted." "I don't need protection," she said, stepping closer. "I need the truth, and I need you to trust me." Lucien looked at her, his blue eyes raw and unguarded. Trust works both ways. The words stung, but Kala held his gaze, refusing to back down. "Then stop treating me like a liability and start seeing me for what I am, your partner." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly Lucy nodded. "You're right." The admission startled her, but before she could respond, he stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. "But this changes everything, Kala. If the splinter group thinks your bloodline is the key to overthrowing me, they won't stop until they have you." "Then we don't give them the chance," she said, her voice steady. Lucien frowned. "What are you thinking?" By the time they returned to the main hall, Kala's plan was fully formed. It was reckless, dangerous, and exactly what the situation called for. "We use me as bait," she said, her voice carrying through the room. Rowan, who was leaning against the fireplace, straightened immediately. "Absolutely not." "I agree," Lucien said, his voice firm. "It's too risky." Kala crossed her arms, meeting their objections head-on. "Risky or not, it's the only way to lure them out. Tasha wants me, right? So we give her what she wants. On our terms?" Rowan shook his head, his expression dark. "This isn't a game, Kala. If something goes wrong—" "I know the risks," she said, cutting him off. "But sitting around and waiting for them to attack again isn't an option. This is our chance to turn the tables." Lucien's jaw tightened, his eyes locked on hers. "You're asking me to gamble with your life." "I'm asking you to trust me," she replied, her voice soft but resolute. The room fell silent as Lucien weighed her words. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, but we do this my way." Rowan groaned. "You're seriously going along with this?" "We don't have a choice," Lucien said, his gaze never leaving Kala's. Kala exhaled, her resolve hardening. "Then let's make it count." As the pack began preparations for the plan, Kala stood alone by the window, staring out into the dark forest. She didn't know what the next few days would bring, but one thing was clear: her bloodline wasn't just a curse. It was a weapon. And she intended to wield it. Chapter 19. The forest was too quiet. Kala's breath frosted in the cool night air as she stood near the edge of the clearing, her pulse hammering in her ears. The plan had been simple, or so it had seemed. Use herself as bait, draw out the splinter group and cut them off before they could regroup. But as the shadows around her deepened, doubt crept in. "Stay sharp," Rowan murmured, his voice low and steady as he moved to her side. "I'm trying," Kala whispered, gripping the dagger Lucien had insisted she carry. "But it feels like we're the ones being hunted." Rowan's sharp gaze scanned the trees. "You're not wrong. They're out there." The crack of a branch snapped them both to attention. Kala's grip on the dagger tightened as shapes emerged from the darkness. 6 rogue wolves, their eyes glowing with menace. The leader of the group, a hulking wolf with a scar cutting across his muzzle, stepped forward, his growl reverberating through the clearing. "They're not going to talk," Rowan said grimly, shifting into his wolf form with fluid grace. Kala stepped back, her heart racing as the rogues lunged forward. The fight was chaos. Rowan was a blur of fur and claws, meeting the rogues head-on with calculated precision. Kala held her ground as best she could, her training kicking in as she dodged and parried the attacks of the rogue wolves who broke past Rowan's defense. She barely registered the shouts and growls around her, her focus narrowing to the immediate threat. A rogue wolf circling her, its fangs bared. "Come on," she muttered, raising the dagger. "Let's see what you've got." The wolf lunged, and Calla sidestepped, slashing the blade across its flank. It yelped and stumbled, giving her just enough time to press the advantage. Another rogue broke past Rowan, forcing Calla to pivot and defend herself again. She could feel the pressure mounting, the odds stacking against them. Where was Lucien? The answer came in the form of a deafening roar. Lucien burst into the clearing in his fully shifted alpha form, his massive wolf body glowing faintly with an otherworldly energy. His presence was enough to give the rogues pause, briefly, then all hell broke loose. Lucien tore into the rogues with unmatched ferocity, his movements a terrifying combination of speed and power. For a moment, Calla dared to hope they had the upper hand, but the splinter group had planned for this. A howl echoed from the trees, and more rogues poured into the clearing. Calla's stomach sank as their numbers doubled, then tripled. "We're outnumbered," Rowan growled, shifting back to human form just long enough to get the words out. Lucien, still in wolf form, snarled in response, his eyes blazing with determination. "Fall back," Rowan shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Calla stumbled back toward the tree line, her chest heaving as she tried to keep up with Rowan. Lucien held his ground, his massive form cutting down rogue after rogue, buying them precious time. "Lucy!" Calla shouted, her voice breaking. He turned to her briefly, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. In that moment, she saw everything. The weight of his responsibility, the fear of losing her, the raw determination to protect his pack. Then he turned back to the fight, his roar shaking the ground beneath her feet. By the time they reached the estate, the damage had already been done. The splinter group had taken advantage of the distraction to launch a secondary attack on the pack's main defenses. The estate was in shambles, its walls scorched and its grounds littered with the injured. Calla's stomach churned as she spotted Ezekiel among the wounded, his face pale and his breathing labored. "No," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. Rowan knelt across from her, his expression grim as he applied pressure to Ezekiel's wound. "He needs help," Calla said, her voice trembling. "I know," Rowan replied, his tone tight, "but the healers are overwhelmed." Calla turned to Lucien as he entered the room, his human form battered and bloodied. "Lucien, we need—" "I know," he interrupted, his voice rough. "We're doing everything we can." The hours that followed were a blur of chaos and grief. Despite their efforts, Ezekiel's injuries proved too severe. He passed just before dawn, his loss sending shockwaves through the pack. Calla sat outside the estate, her hands trembling as she tried to process the night's events. She'd thought the plan would give them an advantage, but instead it had left them shattered. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Lucien approached her, his expression dark and unreadable. "Calla!" "Don't," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I know I screwed up. You don't have to say it." "This wasn't your fault," he said, his tone softening. "Wasn't it?" she shot back, standing to face him. "I'm the one who wanted to use myself as bait. I thought I could make a difference, and instead I just made everything worse." Lucien's jaw tightened, his own guilt evident in the way his shoulders slumped. "I shouldn't have let you take that risk." Calla laughed bitterly. "You didn't let me do anything, Lucien. I made a choice, and now Ezekiel's gone because of it." The raw emotion in her voice seemed to pierce through his defenses. He reached for her, but she stepped back, her chest heaving. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she admitted, her voice breaking. Later that evening, as Calla sat alone in her room, she noticed a small box on the bedside table. Inside was an old locket engraved with her family's crest, along with a note. "The past holds the key to the future. Don't give up now." Her fingers tightened around the locket as a spark of determination flickered to life. The fight wasn't over yet. The locket felt heavier than it should have, its intricate design pressing into Cala's palm as she studied it. The engraving, Kuluf, encircled by vines, matched the crest on the ancient document she'd found in the hidden room. She turned it over, her breath catching as she spotted a faint inscription along the edge, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Faithful to what? A family she barely remembered? A pack that didn't trust her? A mate who— She stopped the thought cold, shaking her head. Dwelling on what she'd lost wouldn't get her anywhere. Her fingers brushed the small latch and the locket clicked open. Inside, folded so small it was nearly hidden, was a scrap of paper. Cala unfolded it carefully, her heart pounding as she read the hastily scrawled words. Seek the forest's edge, where the vines meet the stone. Her mind raced. Was this some kind of clue? Had her family left this behind, knowing she'd eventually find it? She slipped the locket into her pocket and rose to her feet. If there were answers to be found, she wasn't going to wait for permission to look for them. The forest was quiet as Cala made her way through the dense undergrowth. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the ground. She kept her senses sharp, the dagger Lucian had given her tucked into her belt. Her destination wasn't far, a crumbling stone wall she'd seen during one of her training sessions with Rowan. At the time, it had seemed unremarkable, overgrown with ivy and moss. Now, it felt like it might hold the key to everything. The air grew colder as she approached, the faint rustle of leaves the only sound. She stopped in front of the wall, her breath fogging in the chill night air. "Where the vines meet the stone," she murmured, her fingers trailing over the rough surface. She searched for several long minutes, frustration building with each passing moment. Then, her hand caught on something, a small, round indentation hidden beneath a thick tangle of ivy. Her heart leapt. She pulled the locket from her pocket and pressed it into the indentation. It fit perfectly. The wall groaned as a section of it shifted, revealing a narrow passage leading downward. The hidden chamber was small and damp, the walls lined with shelves holding dusty tomes and glass jars filled with mysterious substances. A single pedestal stood at the center of the room, a leather-bound journal resting atop it. Cala approached cautiously, her fingers brushing the journal's worn cover. She opened it, the pages filled with her ancestors' handwriting, the entries painted a grim picture. A tale of alliances formed and broken, power struggles that had nearly torn the pack apart, and a desperate attempt to protect the Accord from those who sought to destroy it. One name appeared repeatedly in the text: Eleanor Arbor, Cala's great-grandmother. Her stomach clenched as she read Eleanor's final entry. The Accord must endure, no matter the cost. If it falls into the wrong hands, the pack will crumble and chaos will reign. To my descendants, trust no one who seeks the Accord for their own gain. Cala's fingers tightened around the journal. The splinter group wasn't just after Lucian's power, they were after the Accord itself, and her bloodline was the key to unlocking it. She was still deep in thought when she heard a noise behind her. Spinning around, dagger in hand, she found Rowan standing in the passageway, his expression unreadable. "You followed me," she said, her voice sharp with suspicion. "You weren't exactly subtle," he replied, stepping into the chamber. "What is this place?" Cala hesitated, unsure whether to share what she'd found, but the memory of Eleanor's warning, "Trust no one," made her pause. "It's part of my family's history," she said carefully. Rowan studied her, his sharp gaze seeming to see more than she wanted to reveal. And it doesn't change anything," she said, tucking the journal into her bag. "The splinter group is still a threat, and we need to stop them." Rowan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Lucian's been looking for you. He's worried." Cala scoffed. "Worried I'll mess things up again?" "No," Rowan said firmly. "Worried you'll get yourself killed." The sincerity in his tone took her by surprise, but she pushed it aside. "Let's go," she said, brushing past him. "I have a feeling this is just the beginning." When Cala returned to the estate, Lucien was waiting for her in the study. He stood by the fireplace, his expression a mix of relief and frustration. "Where were you?" he demanded, his voice low but edged with anger. "Out," she said, brushing past him to set her bag on the table. "Out?" he repeated, his tone rising. "Calla, you can't just disappear like that. Do you have any idea how dangerous?" "I can take care of myself," she interrupted, meeting his gaze. Lucien's eyes flashed with anger. "This isn't about you being capable. It's about the fact that you're a target. Every time you put yourself at risk, you're putting the entire pack at risk." Calla's frustration boiled over. "Maybe if you stopped treating me like a liability, you'd see that I'm trying to help." "I see it," Lucien said, his voice softening. "But I can't lose you, Calla. Not after everything we've been through." The raw vulnerability in his words took the fight out of her. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I found something tonight." Lucien frowned. "What?" She hesitated, then pulled the journal from her bag. "It's a record of my family's involvement in the Accord. The splinter group isn't just after you. They're after this." Lucien took the journal, his expression darkening as he skimmed its pages. "This changes everything." "It does," Calla agreed. "And if we're going to stop them, we need to act fast." As Lucien closed the journal, a shadow fell across his face. "They're not just after the Accord," he said grimly. "They're after you." Calla's resolve hardened. If the splinter group wanted a fight, she was ready to give them one. Chapter 20. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the estate grounds in hues of soft pink and gold. Calla sat on the porch steps, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. The weight of the past few days pressed down on her shoulders, leaving her feeling hollow and restless. She didn't even look up when Astra sat beside her, her friend's presence familiar and steady. "You look like hell," Astra said, her voice gentle but teasing. "Thanks," Calla muttered, forcing a weak smile. "That's exactly what I needed to hear." Astra nudged her with an elbow. "Come on, don't give me that. I know that look. You're spiraling." Calla sighed, setting the mug down. "How could I not be? Every time I think we're making progress, something happens to remind me how far out of my depth I am." "You're not out of your depth," Astra said firmly. "You're just in the deep end. There's a difference." Calla laughed humorlessly. "Feels the same to me." "No, it doesn't," Astra said, her tone softening. "You're still swimming, Calla. You're still fighting. That's what matters." Calla turned to look at her friend, her chest tightening. "What if I'm not enough? What if everything I've done so far has just made things worse?" Astra placed a hand on her shoulder, her gaze steady. "You are enough. Do you know why? Because you haven't given up. You've faced everything that's been thrown at you, and you've survived. That's more than most people can say." Calla blinked back the sting of tears. "It doesn't feel like enough." "Then make it enough," Astra said simply. "You're stronger than you think, Calla, and you've got people who believe in you, even if some of them are too stubborn to show it." Calla managed a small smile. "You mean Lucien?" "I mean Lucien," Astra said with a knowing smirk. Meanwhile, in the training grounds, Rowan found Lucien standing near the tree line, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You've been brooding long enough," Rowan said, his tone as blunt as ever. Lucien didn't turn. "I'm thinking." "You're sulking," Rowan corrected. "There's a difference." Lucien's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Rowan stepped closer, crossing his arms. "You're the alpha. You don't get to wallow in self-pity while the pack is falling apart." "I know my responsibilities," Lucien said, his voice low and dangerous. "Then act like it," Rowan snapped. "Because right now, all I see is a man too afraid to admit he needs help." Lucien finally turned, his blue eyes blazing. "You don't understand what it's like to carry this weight." "You're right, I don't," Rowan said evenly, "but I do know that pushing everyone away, including Calla, isn't helping. She's been fighting tooth and nail to prove herself, and all you've done is make her feel like she's not enough." The words hit Lucian like a punch to the gut. "She's stronger than you give her credit for," Rowan continued, "and if you don't see that soon, you're going to lose her." Lucian found Calla in the garden later that morning, pacing near the rose bushes. She froze when she saw him, her expression a mix of anger and weariness. "Here to lecture me again?" she asked, crossing her arms. "No," Lucian said, his voice quieter than usual. "I'm here to apologize." Calla blinked, caught off guard. "Apologize? I've been unfair to you," he admitted, stepping closer. "You've been fighting so hard to prove yourself, and I've treated you like a liability instead of an ally." Calla stared at him, her chest tightening. "Lucienne!" He reached for her hand, his gaze raw and unguarded. "I'm scared, Calla. I've spent so long trying to protect this pack, trying to be strong enough to keep everyone safe. And now, with everything that's happening, I'm terrified of losing you." Her breath hitched, his words cutting through the layers of doubt and frustration she'd been carrying. "You're not going to lose me," she said softly. "But I can't be someone you need to shield all the time. I need to stand beside you, not behind you." Lucian nodded, his grip on her hand tightening. "I trust you, Calla, and I'm sorry it's taken me so long to show it." She managed a small smile, her heart feeling lighter for the first time in days. "Good, because we've got a lot of work to do." Together they called a meeting in the main hall, rallying the pack to prepare for the confrontation with the splinter group. Calla stood beside Lucian as he addressed the crowd, her presence a symbol of their unity. "This pack has faced challenges before," Lucian said, his voice strong and steady. "But this time, we're not just defending ourselves, we're taking the fight to them." The pack murmured in agreement, the tension in the room giving way to a renewed sense of purpose. Calla stepped forward, her heart pounding. "I know some of you still don't trust me," she said, her voice clear, "and I don't blame you, but I'm here and I'm ready to fight for this pack, for all of us. We can win this, but only if we stand together." The murmurs grew louder, and for the first time, Calla saw something other than skepticism in their faces. After the meeting, Lucian pulled Calla aside. "There's something you need to see," he said, leading her to the hidden room where so much of this had begun. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, holding a small, intricately carved box. Lucian opened it carefully, revealing a dagger unlike any Calla had ever seen. Its blade shimmered with an iridescent light, and runes were etched into its hilt. "This is the Fang of Sovereignty," Lucian said. "It's a weapon passed down through the alphas of this pack. It was forged to protect the Accord, and those who carry its legacy." Calla stared at the dagger, its power palpable. "Why haven't you used it before?" "Because it requires two," Lucian said, his gaze locking onto hers. "The Alpha and the guardian of the Accord's bloodline." Her breath caught as the weight of his words sank. "We can end this, Calla," Lucian said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "But we have to act now." Calla met his gaze, her fear giving way to resolve. "Then let's do it." As Calla and Lucian prepared to wield the Fang of Sovereignty, the sound of a distant howl echoed through the forest. The splinter group was coming, and this time they were ready. Chapter 21. The forest seemed alive as Calla led Lucian and Rowan deeper into its depths, the map she'd sketched from her family's journal clutched in her hand. The trees grew denser the farther they went, their towering forms blocking out the sun and casting everything in shifting shadows. "Are you sure about this?" Rowan asked, his voice skeptical but tinged with curiosity. "No," Calla admitted, her eyes scanning the map again. "But it's all we've got." Lucian walked beside her, his expression unreadable. "The journal said this place was hidden for a reason. If it's what I think it is, the splinter group won't let us reach it without a fight." "That's why we're here," Calla said, her voice steadier than she felt. She tried to ignore the weight of Lucien's gaze as they pressed on, his silent presence both reassuring and nerve-wracking. They reached a clearing just before noon, the sound of a nearby stream breaking the silence. At the center of the clearing stood a crumbling stone archway, its surface covered in moss and ancient runes. "This is it," Calla said, her breath catching. Lucian approached the archway, his hand brushing against the cold stone. "It's older than the pack itself," he murmured. "This was built by the first wolves." Rowan circled the structure, his sharp eyes scanning for threats. "If this place is so important, why isn't it guarded?" "It was hidden," Calla said, stepping closer. "Until now." The runes glowed faintly as Calla traced her fingers over them, her mind racing. The script was unlike anything she'd seen, but the symbols felt familiar, as though they were etched into her memory. "What are they?" Lucian asked, his voice low. Calla tilted her head, piecing the symbols together. "It's a warning," she said slowly. "And a key." Lucian raised an eyebrow. "A key to what?" Before Calla could answer, the ground beneath the archway began to shift. The faint glow of the runes intensified, casting the clearing in an eerie light. "You just had to touch it, didn't you?" Rowan muttered, moving closer to Lucian as the archway came to life. The stone shifted with a grinding sound, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into the earth. "Well, that's not ominous at all," Calla said, trying to inject some humor into the tension. Lucian stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Stay close," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The air grew colder as they descended, the walls of the staircase damp and covered in the same glowing runes. The faint scent of earth and stone filled the air, and Calla's heartbeat thundered in her ears. When they reached the bottom, the passage opened into a vast chamber. At its center stood a pedestal holding a gleaming orb, its surface swirling with silvery light. "Is that what I think it is?" Rowan asked, his voice reverent. "The moonstone," Lucian said, his expression grim. "It's real." Calla frowned. "What's the moonstone?" "It's a relic of the first wolves," Lucian explained. "It's said to amplify the Alpha's power and strengthen the bond between the pack and the land." "So, it's a game changer," Calla said. Lucian nodded. "If we can protect it." As Calla approached the pedestal, the runes along the walls flared brighter, casting the chamber in a dazzling light. "This is definitely a trap," Rowan muttered, his hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. Calla ignored him, her attention fixed on the swirling light within the orb. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above its surface. The runes pulsed in response, and a deep, resonant voice echoed through the chamber. "Only the bloodline may claim the light." Calla froze, her breath catching. "What does that mean?" "It means it's you," Lucian said, his voice steady. "You're the only one who can touch it." Calla's stomach churned. "What if I mess this up?" "You won't," Lucian said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I trust you." The weight of his words settled over her, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. Taking a deep breath, Calla placed her hands on the orb. The moment her fingers touched the surface, a surge of energy shot through her. Images flooded her mind. Wolves running beneath the moonlight, ancient battles fought to protect the pack, and a figure that looked strikingly like her great-grandmother standing in this very chamber. The light from the orb flowed into her, filling her veins with warmth and power. When it finally subsided, she staggered back, her chest heaving. "What just happened?" she asked, her voice shaky. "You claim the moonstone," Lucian said, his gaze filled with awe. "It's bound to you now." Rowan frowned. "That's great and all, but we need to move. If I know Tasha, she'll be coming for this place soon." They barely made it out of the chamber before the first rogue wolves appeared, their growls echoing through the forest. "Move!" Lucian barked, shifting into his wolf form in an instant. Calla ran, clutching the orb tightly as Rowan covered her flank. The forest erupted into chaos, snarls and shouts filling the air as the splinter group descended on them. A rogue lunged at her, its teeth snapping inches from her arm. Before she could react, Lucian slammed into it, his claws tearing through its flank. Go! He growled, his voice distorted by his wolf form. Calla stumbled forward, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She could hear Rowan fighting behind her, his movements efficient and deadly. "We can't keep running," she shouted, spinning around to face the rogues. Lucian and Rowan joined her, their expressions fierce as the rogues surrounded them. "Hold the line," Lucian said, his voice steady despite the odds. Calla raised the dagger Lucian had given her, her grip firm. "Let's finish this." The battle was brutal. Calla fought with everything she had, her training and determination driving her movements. The moonstone's energy seemed to pulse through her, heightening her senses and giving her strength she didn't know she had. Lucian was a blur of power and precision, his alpha presence dominating the battlefield. Rowan fought beside him, his movements sharp and unyielding. Together they held their ground, forcing the rogues to retreat. As the last of the splinter group disappeared into the forest, Calla collapsed against a tree, her chest heaving. "We did it," she said, her voice shaky but triumphant. "For now," Lucian said, his human form re-emerging. His gaze softened as he looked at her. "You were incredible," Calla managed a weak smile. "I had good teachers," Rowan smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." Lucian's gaze darkened as he looked toward the horizon. "They'll regroup." This was just a warning. Calla tightened her grip on the moonstone, determination flaring in her chest. "Then we'll be ready." The final battle was coming, and this time they wouldn't hold back. Chapter 22. The battle came without warning. The first howl shattered the early evening calm, a blood-curdling sound that sent Calla and the pack scrambling into action. Lucian's orders came swiftly, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Form a defensive line. Protect the den." Calla ran alongside Rowan, the moonstone secured in a pouch strapped to her side. The forest erupted with snarls and shouts as the splinter group descended, their sheer numbers swallowing the ground like a tidal wave. "They're everywhere," Rowan muttered, his eyes narrowing as he shifted into his wolf form. "We knew they'd come," Calla said, gripping her dagger. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but she forced herself to focus. This wasn't the time to falter. Lucian appeared at her side, his alpha presence steadying her nerves. "Stick with Rowan," he commanded, his voice deep and urgent. "We hold the line here." Calla nodded, though her stomach churned with unease. The initial clash was brutal. The rogues struck with ruthless precision, their attacks coordinated in a way that caught the pack off guard. Calla fought alongside Rowan, her movements sharp and deliberate. The moonstone pulsed faintly against her hip, its energy coursing through her veins. A rogue lunged at her, its teeth bared. Calla ducked and drove her dagger upward, catching it in the side. It yelped and fell back, but another quickly took its place. "Stay on your feet," Rowan barked, his claws raking across a rogue's flank. "I'm trying," Calla shot back, dodging another attack. Despite their efforts, the pack was losing ground. Then Tasha appeared. She emerged from the shadows with a cruel smile, her presence commanding. The battle seemed to pause as the splinter group's leader stepped into the fray, her golden eyes gleaming with triumph. "Well, isn't this a sight?" Tasha said, her voice dripping with mockery. "The great Lucian wolf and his little mate fighting a losing battle." Lucian growled, his wolf form towering as he moved toward her. "Tasha," he snarled, "you've gone too far." "Too far?" she echoed, feigning innocence. "I'd say I've gone exactly far enough." Her gaze shifted to Calla and her smile widened. "And you, playing the brave little hero, do you really think you can stop what's coming?" Calla glared at her, gripping her dagger tighter. "We're not giving up," Tasha laughed, the sound cold and hollow. "Oh, sweet Calla, this isn't about you giving up. It's about you losing everything." With a flick of her wrist, Tasha signaled her rogues to attack. The splinter group surged forward, their numbers overwhelming Lucian's pack. Calla fought with everything she had, her training with Rowan flashing through her mind as she dodged, struck, and countered. But it wasn't enough. A rogue blindsided her, its claws raking across her arm. She cried out, stumbling back as pain lanced through her. Before she could recover, another rogue grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms. "Kala!" Lucien's roar echoed across the battlefield. She struggled against her captor, but its grip was ironclad. Tasha approached, her smile twisting into something crueler. "You're so much more useful to me like this," Tasha said, her hand brushing against the pouch at Kala's side. The moonstone pulsed, its light flickering as if in protest. "Let her go!" Krishit snarled, his eyes blazing with fury. Tasha chuckled. "You're in no position to make demands, Alpha." The battle raged on around them, but Kala's world narrowed to the desperate struggle against her captor and the taunting presence of Tasha. Lucien lunged toward her, his wolf form moving with terrifying speed. But before he could reach her, Tasha's rogues swarmed him, forcing him to his knees. "Lucien!" Kala's voice broke as she watched him struggle, his once unshakable strength faltering under the weight of their enemies. Tasha crouched in front of him, her smile victorious. "Look at you," she said. The mighty Alpha brought to his knees. "How does it feel to know you've lost?" Lucien growled, his muscles trembling as he fought against his captors. "This isn't over." "Oh, but it is," Tasha said, her tone almost pitying. "You just don't realize it yet." Kala's heart ached as she saw the despair in Lucien's eyes. She had to do something. Anything. Her gaze dropped to the moonstone, its light dim but still present. She remembered the words etched into the journal. The accord must endure no matter the cost. A spark of determination ignited within her. She couldn't let this be the end. Drawing on every ounce of strength she had left, Kala twisted in her captor's grip and drove her elbow into its ribs. The rogue howled, its grip loosening just enough for her to break free. She lunged for the moonstone, her fingers brushing its surface as a surge of energy shot through her. The runes on its surface flared brightly, casting the battlefield in blinding light. The light seemed to freeze the rogues in place, their snarls turning to whimpers as they recoiled. Even Tasha stumbled back, her confident smirk replaced with shock. "What are you doing?" Tasha demanded, her voice rising. Kala stood tall, the moonstone glowing in her hands. "Ending this." The light faded, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. The rogues hesitated, their confidence shaken. But the battle wasn't over yet. Lucien rose to his feet, his strength returning as he met Kala's gaze. "We fight," he said, his voice steady and resolute. Kala nodded, her grip on the moonstone tightening. "Together." As the pack regrouped and prepared for a final stand, Kala felt a newfound strength coursing through her. She wasn't just a pawn in this fight, she was a key player. The next move was theirs, and they were ready to take it. Chapter 23. The clearing was eerily quiet after the blinding light of the moonstone faded. Kala clutched the glowing artifact, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Around her, Lucien's pack regrouped, their bruised bodies forming a protective circle. Across the battlefield, Tasha staggered to her feet, her confidence replaced by raw fury. "You think a little parlor trick will stop me?" she sneered, brushing dirt off her coat. Kala squared her shoulders, the moonstone pulsing steadily in her hands. "It's not a trick," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her legs. "It's a warning." Tasha's lips curled into a snarl. "Then let me give you one of my own." With a sharp howl, she commanded her rogues forward. The battle reignited in an instant. Lucien roared, his massive wolf form charging into the fray, with Rowan close behind. The rest of the pack followed, their snarls and growls echoing through the trees as they clashed with Tasha's forces. Kala held her ground, the moonstone's energy coursing through her. She could feel its power, ancient and untamed, sharpening her senses and heightening her reflexes. A rogue lunged at her, its claws swiping inches from her face. Kala ducked, the moonstone flaring in response to her fear. The rogue yelped, recoiling as if burned. "Not today," she muttered, gripping the artifact tighter. Across the clearing, Lucian fought with renewed determination. He moved like a storm, his claws and fangs tearing through the rogues with ruthless efficiency. For the first time in days, he felt the weight of doubt lift from his shoulders. Calla was right. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting for each other. Tasha, meanwhile, circled the chaos, her golden eyes locked on Calla. "You have no idea what you're holding," she taunted, her voice cutting through the noise. "I know enough," Calla shot back, her chest tightening as Tasha advanced. The splinter leader smirked. "Then you know it's not meant for you." Calla's grip on the moonstone tightened. "Guess we'll find out." The confrontation between the two women was electric. Tasha lunged, her claws flashing in the dim light. Calla dodged, the moonstone's energy guiding her movements. She swung the artifact like a shield, its light repelling Tasha's attacks with each strike. "You're out of your league," Tasha hissed, her movements growing more desperate. "Maybe," Calla said, her voice breathless but defiant. "But at least I'm not alone." As if on cue, Lucian appeared at her side, his wolf form towering over her. He growled low in his throat, his eyes blazing as he faced Tasha. "This ends now," he said, his voice a deadly promise. The final confrontation was brutal. Tasha fought with everything she had, her rogue allies closing in to protect her. But Lucian's pack, united and determined, held their ground. Rowan and Marceline flanked Lucian, their combined strength carving a path through the rogues. Calla, clutching the moonstone, focused on Tasha. The artifact's power thrummed in her hands, the ancient runes glowing brighter with each passing moment. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Tasha shouted, her voice tinged with panic. "Then maybe you shouldn't have started this fight," Calla replied. With a surge of energy, she pressed the moonstone forward. Its light erupted, a brilliant cascade that enveloped Tasha and her remaining rogues. Tasha screamed, the sound raw and piercing, before the light consumed her. When the dust settled, the clearing was eerily silent. The rogues had fled, their leader defeated. Calla dropped to her knees, the moonstone dimming as its energy receded. Her entire body ached, her hands trembling as she released the artifact. Lucian shifted back into his human form, his chest heaving as he knelt beside her. "Calla," he said softly, his hand brushing her cheek. "Are you okay?" She nodded, her eyes meeting his. "We did it." He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that sent warmth flooding through her. "We did." But their victory came at a cost. As the pack regrouped, Calla noticed Rowan kneeling over one of their fallen allies, a young wolf named Lila. Her injuries were severe, her breathing shallow. "She saved me," Rowan said, his voice tight. "She took the hit that was meant for me." Calla's heart ached as she knelt beside them, her hand resting on Lila's shoulder. "We'll honor her sacrifice," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Lucian placed a hand on Rowan's shoulder, his expression somber. "She'll be remembered." As the pack began to tend to their wounds and the aftermath of the battle, Calla and Lucian stood together, the moonstone resting between them. "We stopped Tasha," Calla said, her voice quiet. Lucian nodded. "But this isn't over." Calla frowned. "What do you mean?" Lucian picked up a scrap of paper Tasha had been carrying, the words scrawled across it sending a chill down his spine. The accord was just the beginning. The real power lies beyond. He handed the note to Calla, his expression grim. "There's something bigger coming." Calla stared at the note, her resolve hardening. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Together, she and Lucian would face whatever came next, for the pack, for their bond, for their future. Chapter 24. The first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, casting golden light over the battle-scarred estate. The air was thick with the mingling scents of earth and blood, but the worst was over. For the first time in weeks, the pack had peace, however fragile. Calla stood near the edge of the clearing, the moonstone warm in her hands. Its glow had dimmed, but its energy still pulsed faintly, a quiet reminder of what they'd fought for and what they'd lost. Behind her, the pack gathered in small groups. Some were tending to the wounded, others repairing what they could of the estate's defenses. The atmosphere was somber, but laced with an undercurrent of resilience. Lucian approached from behind, his steps heavy but steady. "Calla," he said softly. She turned to face him, her chest tightening at the sight of his bruised face and torn shirt. Even battered, he exuded an unshakable strength. "We did it," she said, her voice quiet. Lucien nodded, his blue eyes meeting hers. "Because of you." They walked together to the center of the clearing, where Rowan and Marceline were overseeing the injured. Lila's body had been placed on a makeshift pyre, adorned with wildflowers and tokens from the pack. "She saved us," Rowan said, his voice tight with emotion. "And she'll always be remembered," Lucian replied. His gaze swept over the gathered pack members. "We owe her, and everyone who gave their lives, a future worthy of their sacrifice." Calla stepped forward, her heart heavy but resolute. "And we'll make sure they didn't fight in vain." Marceline, for once, didn't offer a snide comment. Instead, she nodded, her usually sharp expression softened by grief. The pack held a quiet ceremony to honor the fallen, their howls rising in unison as the flames consumed the pyre. Calla stood beside Lucien, her hand in his, feeling the weight of the moment. When the fire burned low, Lucien turned to face the pack. "We've been through hell," he said, his voice strong, "but we're still standing, and we're stronger because of it." The pack murmured in agreement, their bond palpable in the air. Lucien's gaze shifted to Calla, and he held out his hand. "Calla, Arbur, step forward." Her heart skipped a beat as she stepped into the center of the circle, her hand slipping into his. Lucien's voice softened, but it carried the weight of an alpha. "This woman has proven her strength, her loyalty, and her place in this pack. She is not only my mate but a protector of the Accord and a bridge to our future." Calla's throat tightened as the pack erupted into a chorus of howls and cheers, their acceptance washing over her like a wave. After the ceremony, Calla and Lucien retreated to a quiet corner of the estate, the weight of the day finally settling over them. "You sure about this?" Calla asked, her tone light but tinged with vulnerability. "Me? As part of your world?" Lucien smiled, the kind of rare, genuine smile that made her heart flutter. "I've never been more sure of anything." Calla arched an eyebrow. "Not even when you decided to charge into a battle outnumbered 5-1? His laugh was low and warm. "Not even then." She leaned against his shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "I still don't know what the future holds, but I'm glad it's with you." Lucien wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. You and me." The night gave way to a lavish celebration, the pack's spirits lifted by food, laughter, and a shared sense of triumph. Calla found herself at the center of it all, toasted and congratulated by pack members who had once doubted her. Even Marceline, though still sharp-tongued, approached with a begrudging smile. "You're tougher than you look," she said, clinking her glass against Calla's. "I'll take that as a compliment," Calla replied, her grin widening. As the festivities wound down, Lucien pulled Calla aside. The moonlight bathed the forest in silver, and the distant sound of laughter carried on the breeze. "I have something for you," he said, his voice low. Calla tilted her head. "Another dagger? Because I'm starting a collection." Lucien smirked, but his expression softened as he pulled a small, intricately carved box from his pocket. Not quite. Inside was a silver pendant, its design mirroring the moonstone's swirling light. "It's beautiful," Calla said, her fingers brushing over the cool metal. "It's more than that," Lucien said. "It's a symbol of your place here. My mate. My equal." Calla felt tears prick her eyes as she slipped the pendant around her neck. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Lucian cupped her face in his hands, his gaze unwavering. "Thank you, Calla. For saving me. For saving all of us." Their lips met in a kiss that spoke of promises, of battles fought and won, and of the future they would build together. As they stood together beneath the moonlight, the forest around them seemed to hum with life. But in the distance, a pair of golden eyes watched from the shadows, their owner retreating into the darkness with a knowing smile. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The forest was alive with light and laughter, the scent of wildflowers mingling with the warm summer breeze. Strings of fairy lights hung between the ancient oaks, casting a golden glow over the gathering below. Calla stood at the heart of it all, her dress flowing around her like water. The fabric shimmered in the moonlight, a deep blue that mirrored the night sky. A small smile tugged at her lips as she watched the pack celebrate, their joy infectious. "Not what you pictured a few weeks ago, is it?" Astra teased, appearing at her side with a glass of champagne in hand. "Not even close," Calla admitted, laughing softly. "But I think I like it." Astra clinked their glasses together. "You didn't just survive, Calla, you thrived, and you dragged that brooding alpha of yours kicking and screaming into happiness." Calla rolled her eyes, but her grin wide. "I'd like to think he dragged me a little too." Lucien approached from across the clearing, his sharp suit tailored perfectly to his broad frame. His blue eyes softened as they met Calla's, and she felt that familiar flutter in her chest. "You're stealing the spotlight," he said, his voice low and teasing as he wrapped an arm around her waist. "I thought the alpha always stole the spotlight," she replied, tilting her head to look up at him. "Not tonight," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Tonight, it's all yours." The celebration was more than just a party. It was a renewal. The pack had come together to mark the start of a new era, one defined by unity, strength, and hope. Rowan stood near the fire, laughing as he recounted a battle story to a group of younger wolves. Even Marceline seemed relaxed, though she'd never admit it. Her sharp wit softened as she sipped from a glass of red wine. The estate had been restored to its former glory, its once battered walls now standing tall and proud. The scars of the past remained, but they were a reminder of what they'd overcome. As the night deepened, Lucian led Calla away from the gathering and into the quiet forest. The sounds of the party faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. "Where are we going?" Calla asked, though she didn't mind the mystery. "You'll see," Lucian said, a rare smile playing on his lips. They reached a small clearing where a blanket had been laid out, surrounded by lanterns casting a warm glow. A bottle of wine and a plate of strawberries sat waiting, along with a bouquet of wildflowers. Calla's heart swelled. "You planned this?" Lucien shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Even alphas have their moments," she laughed, pulling him into a kiss. "This is perfect." They sat together beneath the stars, the quiet intimacy a stark contrast to the chaos they'd endured. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Calla asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "All the time," Lucien said, his voice soft, but for the first time it doesn't feel daunting. It feels possible. Calla smiled, threading her fingers through his. "We make a good team, don't we?" "The best," Lucien agreed, kissing the top of her head. The moonstone, tucked safely in the estate, had gone dormant since the battle. But Calla could still feel its energy, a quiet hum that resonated with her own. It wasn't just a relic, it was a symbol of everything they'd fought for. As the moon rose higher, its silver light bathing the clearing, Lucien pulled Calla to her feet. "Dance with me," he said, his voice low and inviting. "There's no music," she teased. "I don't need music," he replied, his hands settling on her waist. They swayed together beneath the stars, the world falling away until it was just the two of them. For the first time in what felt like forever, Calla let herself relax completely. The future was uncertain, as it always would be, but she didn't feel afraid. With Lucien by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. As they danced, the forest seemed to come alive around them. Fireflies floated through the air, their golden glow adding to the magic of the moment. The gentle rustle of leaves and the distant howl of a wolf created a melody all their own. Lucien pulled her closer, his lips brushing against her ear. "I love you, Calla." Her breath caught, her heart swelling with emotion. "I love you too." The words hung in the air, a promise sealed beneath the light of the moon. In a world of wolves and danger, of ancient secrets and fierce battles, Calla and Lucien had found something rare and beautiful. Their love was their strength, their bond unbreakable. And as they stood together beneath the stars, the future stretched out before them, filled with endless possibilities. Their happily ever after had only just begun. The end.